So I think it's probably clear who it's going to impact on. It's going to impact on some temporary workers or flexible employees. So normally if a worker's been supplied on a 336 hour overarching contract of employment, that's indicative of the fact that they're in one of these schemes. If they're not, and they're just true temporary workers on contracts of services, then it's unlikely that they're going to be part of this scheme because they need to be employees to be able to benefit from the tax relief. If they're on a Regulation 10, they could be, Regulation 10 contract, they could be. You'd need to ask the question. Umbrella employees or workers would be affected, most definitely. Self-employed contractors and limited company contractors are really going to be affected by this. And it's the first time really that level of limited company contractor has suffered at the hands of the government really, and I think that's probably the start of a trend that we're going to see over the next couple of years. So, you know, it's going to affect probably the majority of flexible employees that are being supplied out there at the moment. And even if as an end user you don't know one of these schemes is being used, you probably will know post the 6th of April when people start knocking on your door saying the workers want a pay rise because ultimately, you know, they're worse off in the pocket. And, you know, at some ends, and we'll look at the national living wage later, some clients are hoping at that lower end that the introduction of the national living wage, so the 50p pay increase, will actually offset what they lose with regards to losing travel and subsistence costs. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. It's one of those things where we'll just have to wait and see, but it does impact on the majority of flexible labour that's out there at the moment. And it's a nice tax relief to have had the benefit from for the last 5 or 6 years that ultimately is now being removed unless you're in that 10% category where there is clearly no supervision, direction and control, and where you're entitled to continue to claim tax relief. What you also find with these schemes is that arguably for some clients and some recruitment businesses it's been used as a subsidy. So I was involved in a really big case about 18 months ago now where one of my clients was rather dodgily using a travel and subsistence scheme not quite in the right way, ended up on dispatches, ended up taking over about 6 months of my life trying to get them out of the proverbial. But the upshot of that was that the end user said, we weren't aware that you were using a travel and subsistence scheme on our site. Well, why would you? It's got nothing to do with you ultimately. Well, it had got something to do with them when obviously they're being pulled through dispatches, the Guardian, the Daily Mail and God knows what else, basically being the one that's having the finger pointed at. And what became clear in respect of that site and that client was that it went out to tender. They obviously wanted to show from a PR perspective that they were approaching it with clean hands. So it went out for tender. My client was invited to tender. I think everyone viewed it as a bit of a sop really, just to make sure that it was fair, but no one really expected them to be successful, bearing in mind the clobbering in the press that they'd endured in recent weeks. And part of that tender was there is to be no use of any travel and subsistence scheme whatsoever in respect of this site. And as a result of that, everyone's rates went up from 33p an hour, so the margin was 33p an hour, went up to between about 73 and 78p an hour. Big meeting, finance director of this FTSE 250 company, director of procurement, you know, what the hell is going on? Why have we gone from 33p to 78p? Well, the reason that it gone up to that extent was because of using the travel and subsistence scheme. The agency had been allowed to use the employer's national insurance rebate or reductions to subsidise a lower rate of 33p. And if that 50p an hour roughly in NI subsidy was being removed, then it had to go back to 78p an hour to run an on-site provision. And they whittled it down to 5, but one of those 5 was still at 33p an hour. And everyone said, well, this is just not fair. How can they be doing it at 33p an hour? So I said, well, send me the contracts and have a look. And lo and behold, they were continuing to use travel and subsistence. They claimed they didn't know that what they were doing was travel and subsistence, but it was. So anyway, they got knocked out and we were up between 73 and 78p. And the end point of that was that my client was awarded the contract, but the decision was taken that they would defer any decision about travel and subsistence until December last year, as it was now, 2015. So basically, procurement and finance said we can't afford for you not to subsidise our rates. We can't afford 78p an hour. We've got to do it at 33, so we'll turn a blind eye and you can continue to use your travel and subsistence scheme because we need it cheaper. Now, what's going to happen on that site now, post the 6th of April, it can only go one way. It can only go back up, because if it doesn't go up, then no one can afford to supply it at that rate, and the agencies will just walk away. And what you found when these travel and subsistence schemes became really rampant within the recruitment sector was that I was getting people ringing me going, it's ridiculous, such and such a company, who's actually based in this building, has just been tendering for some work and are doing it at 0p an hour. And I'd say, well, 0p margin? And they no, zero. For 6 months they will provide all their temps completely for free. Well, how can you do that? You've got national minimum wage, you've got holiday pay, you've got national insurance, you've got your margin. Why would you do that? Well, the reason that they did it was because they were in a very, very aggressive travel and subsistence scheme. So the worker wasn't better off. And as I said to you at the outset, normally the worker would be better off. They would get more take-home pay as a result of being in one of these schemes. That particular recruitment business made it, or set it up so that the worker was not better off, and they took the whole of the saving, and they basically used that saving to go out and buy business in the market. And they were very aggressive about how they did it. And as much as people trying to comply, people saying it's very aggressive, it was a very attractive selling tool to an end user where you could save a significant amount of margin. And those days are over now, and have been over for a while, in all honesty. So it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, I remember starting out, I don't think I ever saw margin below £1 an hour, and certainly significantly more than £1 an hour. Whereas now, certainly within industrial, you're often talking between sort of 28p and 35p an hour, and providing more service as a result of it. The other impact is going to be more administrative burden and risk if you continue to use the tax relief. So, if you've got contractors who are saying, I want to continue to use the travel and subsistence tax relief, then before you can decide what you're doing with them, there's going to have to be some analysis of whether they're inside or outside IR35, if supervision, direction and control exists on each particular assignment. So that's going to increase the administrative burden. There are some quite creative solutions being peddled at the moment. And as we go through and look at some of the other things, you'll see why those are probably for short-term gain but long-term pain. So I'll just give you an example of a couple that I've seen in the past few weeks. One's called a PSU, which is basically a personal service umbrella. And there are variations to this. I think my favourite so far was a call I had as I was coming down the M6 a couple of weeks ago from a client who said, very excitedly, would this work? I found 352 Indian students who are all prepared to become directors of limited companies. I'm like, where the hell is this going? Right, okay. So the plan is we'll take a temporary worker, we'll create a limited company for them so they'll become have a personal service company. But it won't be a personal service company because it won't fit the definition of a personal service company, because I'll take one of my Indian students who's prepared to be a director for £26 a year and I'll plonk him in as a director of the company along with the temporary worker. Okay. Then what we'll do is we'll continue to claim travel and subsistence because he'll be self-employed and be outside IR35 because it's a true business, it's not a personal service company. Right. And then what we'll do is we'll claim there's something called the national insurance holiday. So for most companies up until April, you get £2,000 a year offset off your national insurance. Now from the 6th of April, because that's been misused by lots of personal service companies that have used that when they're not really entitled to it. The government have said personal service companies are no longer entitled to the national insurance holiday, which is basically £2,000 a year free. But if you're not a personal service company, then you can get £3,000 a year. So pay your Indian student £26 and all of a sudden I've got 2,000, that's where my maths fail me, 2,900 and whatever's left, 80, 76 pounds, which is a benefit to me. And, you know, there we go, job done. It's like, well, A, they're not outside IR35 because they're very clearly a temporary worker. There's clearly supervision, direction and control. You've not even looked at that. They're not going to be outside IR35. It seems a lot of effort to go to for what is not necessarily a great deal of gain and a hell of a lot of risk ultimately with regards to how that would work. The other one that's out there is sort of a PSC model. And that goes along the lines of, right, okay, we take the temporary worker, we create a personal service company, we create a limited company for them. We don't allow them to claim any travel and subsistence costs whatsoever. So all the income that comes into that limited company as it goes out is taxed as if they would be an employee, but they're self-employed. So you initially think, well, what's the point of that? Why would you agree to go into that? You've got all the downsides of being an employee, i.e. you're paying tax as if you're an employee, but you've got none of the upsides in as much as you've got none of the protections. So arguably they're saying not entitled to national minimum wage, not entitled to holidays, not entitled to statutory sick pay, etc., etc., etc. Why would you do that? Well, the reason why it's attractive is the use of the flat rate VAT scheme. And the flat rate VAT scheme was introduced by the government as a way of assisting small businesses reduce red tape. So if your turnover is under a certain level, you can elect to use the flat rate VAT scheme. So rather than have to go through the laborious process that you all do as businesses, which is income and outcome and then what's the net amount you pay over every quarter, they basically say, if you're a haulage contractor, we think your costs are going to look like this, we think your income is going to look like that, so therefore you just need to pay us 11% of whatever you bring in for VAT as your flat rate VAT. So you charge your customer 20% VAT and you account to HMRC for 11%. There's no, how does it balance up? It's just a straightforward transaction. And the peddlers of these schemes are ultimately saying, right, okay, well, in their examples, they're using haulage as an example where it's 11%. So there's a 9% upswing for the worker there. So even though they're paying tax and national insurance if they're an employee, so there's no benefit there, where they are seeing a benefit is that they're making money out of the savings of using the flat rate VAT scheme. And, you know, not wanting to rain on their parade, I think, again, when we see the final legislation, there could be something that outlaws that because they've been launched with great fanfare as the solution. So there's no AWR risk, no agency worker regulation risk, no national minimum wage risk, no holiday risk, no tax issues because we're paying all the tax that would have been due. It's a win-win situation. So I think the government could do something in the final legislation that closes the door on that type of model, and they've done it before. So with agency workers regulations, what they'd done, they defined a temporary work agency in such a way that it excluded umbrella companies. So everyone went, woohoo, umbrella companies are the way to avoid agency worker regulations. And in the final legislation, the government amended the definition so it included umbrellas. So panic over. And I think they might do the same here. The other thing is with the flat rate VAT scheme, it's a gift, so they don't need any legislation. They can just simply pull that. And the third point is that and I'm not a VAT expert, I'm thankfully not that boring, but the way that all tax advisors work is that the HMRC issue bulletins and guides, which is basically their tool to know how the government will police various things. And HMRC normally publish these bulletins and they all read them and learn what HMRC are up to. And within the agency division, in the last couple of weeks, they've issued a new bulletin around anti-avoidance and abuse of flat rate VAT schemes. And under one of the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act, they've restricted access. So no one other than the VAT inspectors can see the notes. So everyone assumes that they have issued a note in response to these schemes of sort of misuse of flat rate VAT, and that they'll be taking some action in respect of it. So, you know, that comes onto the last one, which is compliant risk for everyone involved in the labour supply chain. You know, because if you find you've got people like that in your supply chain and you didn't know about it, then, you know, you need to look at what risk that's potentially causing. Is it going to be short term? Probably not, because HMRC works at an absolute slowest pace ever. But, you know, it's very clear that ultimately if 80% of people who are currently eligible for travel and subsistence shouldn't be eligible for travel and subsistence post the 6th of April. And these schemes are being applied to people other than the 10% where there might be some greyness attached to it. I'm not saying they don't work for certain people, but in my mind, I think the way things are going, it'll either be PAYE, temporary workers, flexible employees, no travel and subsistence, or limited company contractors, and then ultimately it's a decision whether they're inside or outside IR35. For me, I've not seen a solution so far that is sufficiently risk-free for me to feel confident to say to a client or to an end user, yeah, you're not taking any risk in respect of this. And it depends on attitude to risk. Some people, you know, we often get asked this, well, such and such, our competitors are doing it, why can't we? Well, you can do it, but you've just got to accept the level of risk that the competitor are accepting. If you're not prepared to accept that level of risk, then it's not for you. So it is all about risk, really, and sort of minimising and analysing the risk.